Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third, and on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. Please tweet with the hashtag Learning Tuesdays to share any questions, reflections, or observations that you may have from today's webinar, and we will be sure to retweet. Once again, the webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's GLR Learning Tuesday webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last 20 to 30 minutes to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. And we are also live streaming this session on our Facebook page. We will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Lastly, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars, including sessions in our regular 3 p.m. Eastern time slot and frequent sessions in the earlier 12:30 p.m. time slot as well. Next week includes a double header. In the earlier time slot, you can learn more about one of the GLR campaigns featured today, Lehigh Valley Reads, while we continue the conversation about high dosage tutoring as a strategy for accelerating learning and learning loss recovery, exploring state-level actions for fast-tracking expansion. The following week, we will have another double header featuring the philanthropic strategies for promoting parents as essential partners in our next Funder to Funder conversation, and our partners at Attendance Works in the 3 p.m. time slot as well. The registration and links for these upcoming sessions will be posted in the chat box now. And joining you now is Sarah Torian, a consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra. I don't know how many of these webinars I've done, and I still forget sometimes to unmute myself. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's timely and incredibly important conversation about the role of community schools in accelerating learning and learning loss recovery that was planned in partnership with our colleagues at the Institute for Educational Leadership. Community has been at the heart of the work of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading since its launch back in 2010. And with more than 5,200 local organizations and more than 600 state and local funders working as a part of local coalitions in 350 plus communities across the country, the campaign is rooted in the belief that community partners must be mobilized to support the whole child on the path to early school success. And in the past year, that belief has been reinforced over and over and over again. When schools were forced to close their doors last March, it became abundantly clear both that schools play incredibly essential roles in children's lives and that robust partnerships between schools, families, and community partners are vital to children's success. And with that in mind, we are incredibly excited to lift up and share the research-based model of community schools with our network, including the federal funding streams that can be tapped to establish and scale community schools, and state and local approaches to funding this approach. And to begin the conversation, I am incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our panel for today's conversation, sharing just very brief highlights about each of our panelists, but I would encourage you to check out longer bios in a link that's posted in the chat box. First, I'd like to welcome and introduce our moderator for today. That's Dr. John Garcia III. John serves as the president of the Greater LA Education Foundation. a philanthropic knowledge and action arm of the LA County Office of Education. Previously, he was the Senior Program Officer for Education at the California Community Foundation, a policy analyst for the White House Initiative for Educational Excellence for Hispanics, and a resident fellow at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, among other roles. And before I pass the mic over to John to walk us through the conversation today, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our other panelists as well. First is Jose Munoz. Jose has served as the director of the Coalition for Community Schools at the Institute for Educational Leadership since 2017 and is currently also serving as the interim director at IEL. He brings more than 30 years of cross-sector partnership experiences to his work, focused on creating better paths forward for youth, families, and communities, having previously served as the executive director of the ABC Community School Partnership in New Mexico, where he scaled up community schools in dozens of communities. He's currently leading the coalition's 25,000 Community Schools by 2025 campaign and played a lead role in helping to plan and organize this conversation today. So thank you so much for that, Jose. Next, I'd like to introduce Catarina Sandoval. Currently serving as the Deputy Secretary of Academic Engagement and Student Success in the New Mexico Department of Public Education. Kata has worked in education for more than 2 decades, including more than 10 years as a classroom teacher. She recently served as the Senior Director of Academics and School Performance for the Native American Community Academy, implementing K-12 program development, and has also served in administration with the state's largest school district, the Albuquerque Public Schools, including serving as Chief Academic Officer and Associate Superintendent. So welcome, Kata. Next, I'd like to introduce a pair of presenters from Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley. First is Jill Pereira. At the United Way of Greater Lehigh Valley since 2008, serving in a variety of positions, Jill currently serves as Vice President of Education and Impact, overseeing a $12.7 million annual investment in the areas of education, food access, healthy aging, and community services, including more than $1.4 million annually invested to support the 28-school community school network in the area. Jill led the creation of the Lehigh Valley Reads campaign, which will be the feature of next week's Crucible of Practice Salon, as Sierra shared earlier, in the 12:30 p.m. Eastern time slot. So I'd encourage everyone to make plans to tune in for that conversation to learn a little bit more about the work that she will be sharing today. And there's going to be a registration link posted in the chat box for that. Joining Jill today is one of her community partners, Deb Bowman. For the past 12 years, Deb has served as the Community Schools Director in the Bangor Area School District, one of the 4 school districts in the area where United Way of Greater Lehigh Valley is investing in community schools model, and also the district that Deb attended when she was a child. So she's able to leverage lots of great community contacts. In this position, Deb has worked with numerous students, families, staff, and community partners, engaging a wide variety of resources to support the children and families in the Bangor area. So thank you all for joining us today as panelists to share your knowledge and your expertise with our network and forthcoming opportunities to support this research-based model of community schools. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to John to moderate us and walk us through that conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate it. And just want to say I'm super excited to have this conversation with such an esteemed set of panelists and leaders across our spaces nationally. So without further ado, I just love to jump into this conversation. This is such a critical time. Community schools is really set up to meet this moment. And I think also help lead us when it comes to the future of education, what we think we can do moving forward to meet the needs of all students. So let me begin with our first question to Jose. And so Jose, just to set the stage for today's conversation, can you provide an overview of the community school model and how it can be applied to advance equity and boost child success and well-being, stronger families, and healthier communities?
Well, yeah, John, it's good to see you. It's been a while since I saw you. And I also want to, before I start, just give a thank you to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. At one point in my career, when I was in the local community, I was on the kitchen cabinet. So it's exciting to hear how much they have grown. Just A little bit about the coalition, if I could, John, before I jump to that conversation. So we're an alliance of local, state, and national leaders who advocate for community schools as an equity strategy. So it's very relevant to your question that you have. And currently, we have a roster of nearly 2,000 community schools in about over 400 zip codes in 150 different cities. So a lot of learning we've done through our networking. So this conversation about how it could be applied to advance equity and boost child success and well-being and stronger families and healthy communities is really relevant. Be remiss not to mention this moment that we've been through with the pandemic and racial injustice, and also an economic crisis that we're in. So it's justifiable that there is a nervousness about the standardized testing that we are in this moment. It's been discussed a lot, especially given a history of unintended negative consequences in communities of color. So we've been speaking to many young people about this equity conversation. We call our network of young folks called the Next Generation Coalition. And so what they've been expressing is during this time, it meant losing school support systems, becoming isolated without their friends, not knowing even when their next meal was going to come. They've been navigating some family challenges as they see parents losing jobs, or even if they were food deprived, even going more food deprived. Not having internet access adding to the frustration of school, or even the right technology, and which caused them to not even show up to school at all. Some even speaking to as in some of those circumstances is, well, why should I show up? So, but I think recently with the Biden administration's new guidance to states in regards to some of the data we should be watching, I think states have the option now to waive accountability requirements if they publicly report disaggregated chronic absenteeism data. So that kind of information, when you talk about kids not showing up, and especially in communities of color, young people with disabilities, those in rural places or indigenous communities as well, the chronic absenteeism data is the kind of information that could be more useful and relevant and even actionable during this time that we're in. So community schools, what is it, how we advance equity? It's because it's a strategy actually to engage the people closest to the solutions of the issues that need to be addressed, those young people and families that are going through these circumstances the hardest. And so community schools also, they are a vehicle for a regenerative community design development, which actually seeds a more sustainable and more equitable ecosystem within a community. Now, we talked about it being an evidence-based, heard it is introduced as an evidence-based strategy. And thank you to the Learning Policy Institute and the National Education Policy Center for actually looking through about 143 plus different studies of community schools. And through that community design process, what they found out is that there are four main functions within a community school. One of them being, I would call, the foundation of building a community school, which is really active family and community engagement. This surpasses the actual family participation. This is engaging families in the conversation of what is needed to advance their families, not simply what is needed. Sometimes community schools is placed in the bucket of wraparound services, which only keeps us at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. But active family and community engagement includes families at the table of decision-making along with their children. Another bucket, pillar of community schools, I should say, is integrated student supports. Yes, when engaging them, there are times we all go through stress, especially this past year and a half past year, I should say, we've been in. So integrated student supports, and what young people and their families are asking for are more mental health support services. They're asking for their school-based health centers to fully operate during this moment, because they're also disconnected from their health needs as well as providing some of the basic needs. As young people have told me, basic needs are still basic needs. Another pillar of community schools and the studies making it an evidence-based strategy is expanded learning time and opportunities. So this is a time for educators and community partners, community-based organizations, organizers to begin to work together collaboratively to actually extend the learning. Yes, school buildings shut down, and this whole conversation about learning loss brings a negative connotations. Children still learn. The brains didn't shut off. They still had to function. And with community school strategies, we had these partnerships, and I'm sure you hear some of that spoken today by our other panelists, that expanding learning time and opportunities help increase a young person's ability to continue to learn in different spaces. But the crux of a community school, the cornerstone, is a collaborative leadership and the practices thereof. As I mentioned with active family engagement, this is about mobilizing all of the relationships and the resources collectively throughout a community and harnessing them, designed by the people closest to the solution, to make sure they reach and maximize and optimize the opportunities that they have to learn, not just in school, but also to do well in workforce and career for their families and care for themselves, whether it be food or nutrition. So thank you, John. I'll pause right there because I know there's more to talk about.
No, that's great, Jose. I mean, it's very, very, very comprehensive. There's so much going on within community schools. And as I mentioned, they're the perfect vehicle to meet this moment. So from that, I'd like to pivot and move over to Kata. And, you know, we talked about this from a national perspective right now. We heard from Jose. Can you tell us a little bit about the state of New Mexico and how you're working to advance, you know, this research-based approach, supporting families, children, community statewide, but also why did state leaders adopt this approach, and how does it really fit into the Department of Public Education's goals?
Sure, thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. I saw in the chat box, lots of educators, early childhood providers, and partners are with us today. So it's exciting always to be able to have conversations that most impact our families and communities. So happy to be part of this conversation. In New Mexico, we have had a history of community schools for almost 20 years. That's how I first met Jose. I was working at Albuquerque Public Schools, and he at the time was the executive director of ABC, which is a collaborative partnership between the city of Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, and Albuquerque Public Schools. And so I first want to start off by saying that in our state leaders have really recognized and honored through investment, through pieces of legislation that I'll speak about in just a second, that really recognize that community schools as a strategy, right? It's not a program, it's not a curriculum, it's a strategy by which, as Jose said, the folks closest to the solutions, so that being teachers, all the support staff, parents, community partners, students, and the school leadership, as well as district leadership, come together to say, what are the needs of our community? What are the assets of our community? The strengths we want to build upon? And how do we come together to braid funding, to create partnerships where we're building and supporting each other's work and not working in silos, right? That's really, really important. And so that happens at the school level, definitely at the community school level, and the coordinator is a person who coordinates all of that work, because you do need somebody dedicated full-time to be able to coordinate the pillars and make sure they're being integrated at the school level. But you also need folks at the city level like Jose was, people at the district level or state level like me, and then folks nationally to make sure that, that this strategy continues to be invested in over time. So for our state, we're a poor state. New Mexico is one of the poorest, economically poor in the country. We, outside of Albuquerque and Las Cruces and Santa Fe, which are kind of our big cities, most of our state is rural and poor, and has a lot of tribal lands that we partner and work with and honor the sovereignty of our tribal leaders. But we all know, and I know folks on this call, we all know what the data says about growing up economically poor, that there are lots of challenges that come with academic outcomes, right? And so in our state, we have concentrated poverty. So for example, 75% of all students in our state in public schools qualify for free or reduced lunch. And that's probably similar demographics for many on this call. And so I think our state has really recognized through data that the community school strategy is a key lever that we can pull to really ensure that our students continue to learn, to make gains towards grade level mastery, grade level reading and math, despite the obstacles that come with growing up core, right? So that strategy is really important. For example, the data showed that for community schools in our state that had been in operation for at least 5 years, and this is all research done by the Learning Policy Institute that Jose referenced, and I know that we have that as well to be able to share with everyone on the call. It found that community schools that fully implemented all 4 pillars with a full-time coordinator and had been in operation for at least 5 years, their academic outcomes for their students were higher than average as compared to non-community schools with similar demographics. That data piece was key, right? Longitudinal data that shows this strategy works, and teachers were really excited about it. Community partners were really excited about it, and they in turn got their leadership either at the district level, teachers with their union leadership, or their state legislators said, this works. And I feel excited about it. I want to be part of it. And so in 2013, our state legislature passed the Community Schools Act, which established and recognized at the state level that this strategy is something that the state wanted to pursue and invest in, although in 2013, there wasn't enough money at the time to actually make an appropriation to the Community School Act or fund. There was 2 years ago. And so we're very excited because the state took 3 policy actions, key policy actions around community schools to support this work. The first is that when our governor and new administration and we're in our 2nd year in this work, the first thing we did was amend our ESSA plan, the Every Student Succeeds Act, right? That every state has to submit, that really is, this is how we're going to spend our Title I money. We did that to say that for our schools in need of improvement, right, the ones with the lowest academic outcomes for our students, that they could actually use the community school strategy as an evidence-based intervention. They could take those additional Title I monies, federal monies, and use them to implement to the fullest extent possible this strategy to improve outcomes for students. So that was one key policy action we took as a state. Then for the past 2 years, and we are currently in session now, and we'll finish in just a few weeks.
Fabulous panels.
We will have our state legislature actually appropriated money to the community schools fund. And what that allows, it's seed money. We have a grant program for public schools that are interested in becoming a community school. It's 3 years worth of funding. That's in addition to their normal budget that they can use to hire a coordinator. They get technical support and assistance from the public ed department, my team. And they have 3 years to build a sustainable funding stream so that when that grant expires, they're able to continue the work. So we're really excited about that. And just to give you a sense of how, just really how invested districts are and schools are in our state, the very first year that we were able, so this was 2 years ago, the first year of the grant program, 12% of all schools in our state applied. So for us, that's significant. We knew that there was much more demand than money we had for the grants, and the legislature heard that. So last year, they doubled the amount of money that they appropriated to the fund, and we're hoping to triple it this year. So yeah, that's a little overview of New Mexico and how we're at the place now where we're looking to potentially have $20 million appropriated to our community school fund.
Oh, thank you. That's a real commitment, and I think it shows the good work that's continuing to progress and grow there in New Mexico. So Something you said too, I want to give a shout out to those coordinators at community schools. They do so much, creating all these relationships and connections, especially now and during this very challenging time as well. So I want to move on to Jill and talk a little bit more about what's happening at the local level. So Jill, can you tell us a little bit about the communities you're helping to support at community schools in Greater Lehigh Valley, the role that they're playing in those communities, and how you and your partners are using this to support the campaign pillars of school readiness, summer learning, and student attendance?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, John. I'm thrilled to be here today. And I see that there's other United Ways on the call as well, and even a public media station or more. So just let me first say, this work isn't easy. And every time I think about the enormity of the work that's before us in the Lehigh Valley, I think about, or I reach out to a colleague like Kata or Jose to regain my perspective, knowing, their state level or national. And so I just want to give thanks to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for lifting up the conversation today and allowing the opportunity for folks that are really interested in this work to build that peer network, which is so important. So our United Way covers a 3-county footprint. Just to give a little context, here in Eastern Pennsylvania, there's 23 school districts in that 3-county footprint, urban, suburban, and rural, roughly 1 million people across those 3 counties, and about 100,000 students K-12. So the visual that's up on screen right now is really a diagram to kind of help explain how our community schools and the grade level reading pillars are all working together across our region. You can see on the left-hand side there our mission, and when we started this kind of more explicit work around the integration of community schools and grade level reading, we had about a 65% third grade reading rate across our region. And our goal by 2025, it was and is to get to 100% of students reading on grade level by the end of third grade by 2025. And so we've really focused our community school work in 4 of our highest need districts. And you'll hear from Deb Bowman from one of those districts in a little bit. We began that work about 15 years ago, really as a way to address the systemic integration of community resources into public schools to meet the needs of kids and families. And so from a United Way perspective, we had always been investing in programs and services. Education was something that was critical to us in our DNA as a United Way. So we had always been investing in programs and services. And when we started focusing on community schools to get at that systemic piece, you heard Kata and Jose both talk about this as a strategy. It really meant we needed to start funding the infrastructure that's needed to deliver on this strategy of community schools. And so we started small with just 2 schools, and now we're at a network of 28. But in 2011, 2012, when the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading emerged, we really began planning for an alignment of our own work. And in 2014, we launched our first collective impact investment strategy that allowed us to invest in programs and services within the context of the community school place-based strategy. And I have to tell you, after we did that, it was kind of a no-brainer. We looked at it and said, why had we been doing it any other way for all of this time, where we had been kind of siloing our funding and our energy, and this really allowed us to kind of bring it all together. So we further built out that investment plan, and I think I've shared a copy of what our current investment plan looks like, that has community schools as the driving vehicle and third grade reading as our primary and kind of first attainable goal in what we're trying to achieve in our region. Ultimately, our goal is more kids graduating from high school ready for college, career, and community. But with the resources we had available, we really needed to gain some traction and hold and dig in somewhere. And so third grade reading became that for us. Around these critical pillars of school readiness, summer learning, and attendance. So we've deepened our work, and you can see the coalitions there on this diagram a bit. We've really deepened our work in these areas. We've built regional coalitions to advance and integrate each body of this work. And what's maybe newer or different, and I think the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has acknowledged, and maybe I'm a little out of practice on where you all are with this, but the research around ACE scores and childhood trauma and the impacts on childhood development, the ability to learn, and ultimately lifelong outcomes has become a real laser focus in Lehigh Valley. So the Resilient Lehigh Valley Coalition has emerged and really just continues to drive the implementation of trauma-informed practices within systems. All of those pieces are embedded inside of our community school work. And so we really think of our 28 school community school network as an incubator. It's a place where we tap into regularly and we gather information out of this network that's very diverse in and of itself, all of the ideas and issues that are bubbling up. And then we test out new strategies and new ideas and new best practices that we're learning from other communities before we take them to scale. So things like peace corners and trauma-informed care trainings within the context of a community school, attendance ambassadors, the way that we've prescribed summer learning programming based on what we've learned from the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, even some of our explicit reading instruction practices with a newly launched micro-credential have all been piloted within the context of this community school network before moving it out larger scale in our region.
No, thank you for sharing, Jill. I mean, I do think, community schools are these centers, it could be these centers of equity and innovation and great places to move this work. So thank you for sharing. So as you mentioned, I definitely want to hear from Deb Bowman, who is, doing this work locally as well. So Deb, you're the community schools coordinator in Bangor, Pennsylvania, in a rural school district in Lehigh Valley. Can you tell us what your strategy looks like in Bangor and how you and your community partners are working together to support students, but also how you're collaborating with other districts and community schools in the Valley?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, and good afternoon, everybody. I am the community school director for the Bangor Area School District, which we began in 2008 with the United Way of the Greater Lehigh Valley. We are 5 buildings and about 3,000 students. Our district encompasses 87 square miles, which are made up of 4 boroughs and 3 townships. So it's a very large area. We are located in Northeast Pennsylvania, north of the Lehigh Valley, I'm sorry. And we have industrial parks have been built, but primarily everybody travels outside of our area to go to work. So unfortunately, there's not a lot here. And when we began back in 2008, we started district, and then we decided we were going to try and scale down to 2 buildings, and it just didn't work. The needs that we were looking at with the other districts, because we were rural, and we always said different. We used to say, well, Bangor's different, and it is different in comparison to the other community schools that we have in the network. But our needs, as we have gone through the years, we realized we have more of a behavioral, physical health need, and our families were having difficulty with access to services. Some people had medical insurance, but they didn't have dental and vision insurance. So we were able to really tighten up our model and have a rural health model, which in doing that, it was fantastic because we were able to partner with St. Luke's, which is one of our large university health networks here. And they would bring a dental van to our school and a medical van, vision van. So we were able to really have students receive services here at the school, so they weren't missing school days because they were sick or they had to go to the dentist or missing time. So their out of school time was much less, which was fantastic. So to have them here, they were getting the services they needed, and we were able to target a lot of needs that we were seeing. And behavioral health was also a major issue for us, which I'm sure that's probably across the board anymore. But so we've in having the community school, we have a leadership team, a partnership team that we work with, and through that we are able to work with local churches, and they provide school supplies. We have reading initiatives that we do with our health network as well. We do a lot of, trying to think of something with our blood drive that we have. So we try and just reach out as much as we can to our community partners. And initially it was hard, and the buy-in from the schools and being district-wide at first was a challenge. But once people really got and understood the model and it being a strategy, it wasn't, they're like, well, will you handle that, or will your program take care of this? And it takes a while, but raising awareness is huge. And I'm just thrilled that we are where we are, and it's come so far, because I remember visiting New York back in the day, and it was so awesome to see everything that they had there. And now with us, to have a network in the Lehigh Valley. And you had asked about how we work with other schools. We do have a community school network through the United Way and a network director, which is fantastic. It's helped really bring us together. So even with our differences, we can work together to help each other and feed ideas off of one another and share resources among our network to better move us forward. So it's been a really exciting experience.
No, thank you. And something you said makes so much sense, which is really trying to contextualize this work for, your particular needs. That's really important, in that, relationships, partnerships take time to build, right? And there's a certain amount of trust that has to happen. So that's a skill.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that was one thing too, not to cut you off, but just real quick, trust was huge. And once people started to realize, because especially with teachers, we found that they think it's just one more thing that they have to do, or one more thing that's going to come in and it's not going to last. And when they start to see it is lasting and it's here to stay and we're here to help, and it's really taking things off of your plate, it just takes time. And that was good to, it was once we understood that, we were good to go. So Thank you.
Great, that's great, and thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about the current context we're in related to COVID. So Jill, I want to come back to you a little bit. We're approaching, the 1-year anniversary of when COVID-19 disrupted our community, school systems, family and child support. So United Way of Greater Lehigh Valley works with these 23 different school systems, with only a handful of them using the current community schools model. But what impact have you seen when it comes to these partnerships and coordination, a difference, perhaps with the districts with community schools and those who did not have community school models?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think you said it in the open about being made for these times, right? And yes, we cover 23 districts. We have community schools moving in 4 to 5 of those districts. And we have been able to leverage the infrastructure pieces through AmeriCorps Vista and the AmeriCorps program proper. So while kind of formally we have community school partnerships in 4 districts, we do have some other infrastructure that we're building, and they're helping to also change mindsets. When you have people placed in public school buildings that understand community schools and can be promoting this intentional integration of community resources to best support kids, right? It takes a little while to get that traction going, but we have that. And so we were really well positioned. Our schools were really well positioned, those that had community school infrastructure, to pivot and serve during this year-long pandemic. And so while our goals are always about, ensuring that kids and families can have success, what it really has meant in this last year has been about stabilizing our kids and our families and our community writ large. So our community school staff and partners have leveraged each other, right? So everything that we can be doing during a pandemic with social distancing and limited access, we've been doing with a do whatever it takes kind of mentality, and thinking about everything from, opening schools as those distribution sites for food, which was a basic urgent need for so many. And then over the summer and even into this year, kind of continuing, but beyond food, also thinking about in our region, baby supplies were in huge demand, and our food pantries didn't carry diapers and formula and things like that. And so many of our community schools ended up doing drives to be able to acquire those kinds of donations for our kids and families to just have that basic safety net needed to keep everybody stable and safe and moving forward. But also they went hands-on with handing out electronic devices. When everybody flipped to virtual, meant because we're focusing on the highest need districts, many of our school districts, they were not in a one-to-one ratio yet with electronic devices. And so our community schools were able to quickly mobilize and put in place a process for how are we going to acquire the devices that we need? And then how are we going to distribute those to our families? How are we going to make sure that families understand how to access the platforms that our schools are going to be using on those devices? How are we going to make sure that they have hotspots or internet access? And really, again, doing that kind of hands-on, more of a case management, almost in that crisis mode. They've also done things like introducing social emotional learning activities and support groups virtually, and also through handouts and paper packets to make sure that kids and families had some sort of a blueprint for the kinds of things that they could be doing to maintain some normalcy in their lives. Some mentorship opportunities picked up during COVID, and again leveraging those partnerships with some of our community partners that really wanted to keep on in the mentoring. And then things like book distribution, other kinds of resources, school supplies, etc. As well as information on COVID. These community schools become the trusted place for kids and families to receive their information. And so in those really dark days of people just not knowing and being afraid of not having the information that they needed, we found our community schools to be the place that folks were tapping for. Tell me how to not contract this disease, this illness, and where can I go to get the PPE supplies that I need in order to be safe moving forward in community.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very similar to what we did here in Los Angeles, and in all the ways that community schools were able to respond, digital divide and basic needs and otherwise, right, learning in COVID. So great stuff there. I'd like to turn to Deb just to kind of talk about specifically what some of the challenges were that you saw, and then how you all responded in your particular area.
I think a lot of what Jill touched on were the same challenges that we faced as well. The internet problems, they did hand out computers. We worked with local cable providers to help with internet as well for our families. And the more or less managing the questions of when people didn't know where to go. It's nice having that point person, having a coordinator or director at the school that you could reach out to at least, can you help direct me? Like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. Please assist however you can. So those were some of all of the challenges that Jill had mentioned. We were the same. And the food, when people were very worked up with not knowing, losing their job or the unemployment, how everything was working, we did start from the time that we shut down in March. We provided meals to twice a week to families that were, there was a designated email address that they could contact the school. And because our 5 schools, 4 of them are on one main campus and we have one offsite. And so they had food distribution at both of those schools. We had some of our community partners did drives as well and provided hand sanitizer, tissues, masks, anything that they could help with that we could then give back to families. So it was a lot of the same things, like I said, with what Jill did. But I think just having that person, that point of contact is huge. And this work is very like hands-on, and you want to help and you want to give. And I think the lack of contact is probably hard for everybody, even if you're an introvert, but it's very challenging now because you want to be out there and be with everybody and doing the things we normally do. So we've really had to check what we're doing and how we can best do our role and provide services touchless almost. So
thanks, Deb. It's amazing how much folks have really responded just in with these challenging circumstances, trying to do things with distance, masking but still meeting the needs of the community. So great stuff. I want to turn this over to Kata and then Jose to kind of talk about first, statewide, what you saw when it came to community schools response, and then even nationally as well too.
Yeah, for sure. So in New Mexico, very similar stories that Deb just told and Jill, we saw that community schools were very responsive and quick to pivot and meet the immediate needs of their students and families. So that primarily for our state came in the form of food, as you've heard. Most of our community schools have some sort of food pantry located at the school itself. But because we were sheltered in place, community schools were very innovative in terms of how they got those the food supply out to their students and their families. So we saw community schools take their buses and load them with food, and they would go to certain points throughout the community, especially in the rural parts of our state, where we have families who may not have access to transportation. As a state, we have especially in the rural parts, very, very limited public transportation. So the school buses were launched to go out, and they took with them tons of food that could, like non-perishables, that families, could keep in their freezer or in their pantry for several days. They also took with them school supplies. So as a state, we definitely have a lack of infrastructure for even internet, right? The infrastructure doesn't exist in some parts of the state. We've been working on that and have made great progress, but at that point in time, some of our rural districts and remote districts used paper and pencil packets, right? And so they would go to certain parts of their community, distribute food there. In some of our more rural districts, they would also pick, for example, the local Circle K or a gas station where they knew families would almost be certain to go. And that's where they worked with that local vendor, and they had a place next to the newspapers to grab your 5th grade reading packet, right? Or here's the 3rd grade packet for this week. And families, instead of taking the packet back or mailing it to the school, they would just put it in that basket. So we saw some really creative, innovative ways. Another district in the southern part of our state, they had a staff member, was a community member with an old Winnebago, and they donated the Winnebago to the school. They call her Flo, and they used some of their community school funding to renovate it and make it a mobile food pantry. In addition to that, they also took in providing food, they also provide behavioral health services through a telehealth module, right? So we were fortunate with our local university, the University of New Mexico, to have what's called the ECHO telehealth provider. And so they were able to provide behavioral health services through a telehealth module in this Winnebago. We also had other community schools with their mobile food pantries. They partnered with the US Census, right? So as they were delivering food, they took US Census workers with them, and to make sure that every family was counted in their county. Community schools also, many of them organized home visits that were critical. There were some families that were hit hard by COVID, were hospitalized or just ill and quarantining and self-isolating. And so being able to visit those families, check in on the students, make sure they're okay, to meet the immediate needs in terms of health services or food was really important. There were some parts of our district, of our state, where running water was an issue, or just having firewood available was also something that our community schools were able to respond to. So we definitely saw that they were well positioned to meet those immediate needs. The coordinators played an invaluable, critical position in all of this work. And for our state, the coordinator position can be a teacher, it can be a social worker, a counselor, but it can also be a parent. It can be a member of the community who's a mover and shaker and knows that community well, knows how to build relationships, organize and communicate, and build coalitions. So yeah, we're very fortunate to lean on our community schools during this time.
No, thanks for some great examples. Turn it over to Jose to share maybe some national perspectives on this as well.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great list that they were given to, because I can continue that list going on down the road there. But what I'm hearing from everybody is how well positioned community schools were during this moment. This is a moment that nobody ever faced, right? Everybody was in disarray. It was tough to navigate, but it was the relational glue that their coordinators and their community school professionals had with family members and households and community partners across their neighborhoods that they had. It was the consistent communication that they were able to have amongst each other so they can supply all those needs. It was the relentless collaboration, regardless of the barrier that they were facing, in order to make sure people were supported during this time. And what I keep hearing over and over again, and I know it to be true because I see it and hear it all the time, it was the coordination that really made a difference in that person whose job it is to wake up every single day to coordinate these activities. But there was something else too, above some of the basic needs that happened as well too. Kata, I'll brag on New Mexico because we both live here. But during this time, we also had a census. This is something that was going to impact neighborhoods across neighborhoods for the next 10 years. So a group of community school coordinators in Albuquerque, New Mexico got together and they said, not in our watch. And they were actually able to increase their census completion by 6%. So it's I think it was about $12 million per year over the next 10 years for that community. Increase it in the middle of a pandemic, 6%. That was amazing. They also went one up on the CARES Act to stop eviction orders in tenant landlord cases. So yes, everybody knew that you weren't allowed to evict, but there was still a bank of eviction notices that were still put on judges' desks, just ready and waiting for the moment for us to reopen again. And so that meant that there'd have been hundreds, maybe if not thousands of people ready to be evicted at that time. They stopped that. They pulled together the state legislators. They coordinated their members of Congress to be able to do that. In New York City, all the way out to Vancouver, Washington, and those places, they were ready for early childhood for essential employees. They were ready to do that at a moment's notice. In the good old rural Broome County, New York, community schools were actually hosting right away virtual drop-ins to provide social and emotional support, and actually starting social and emotional groups as well. So there's so many creative and innovative ways, but this couldn't have been done without including young people in the conversation and their parents, and also community members in there. And I'll say this last thing about during the pandemic, we engaged a lot of different young people. We had at least 11 different listening events, and still today they're convening in the evenings bi-weekly to continue to learn. And some things that are rising up to the top in regards to community schools, and you heard this with some of the examples as well. Basic needs are still basic needs. So prioritizing like they're still basic needs. They still have some basic needs, and even more so now. But they're also closest to the solution. You hear me say that a lot. So actively engage the ones who are most vulnerable during this time. People and students of color, and those with disabilities. Make sure that we are engaging them in the conversation and in the design of the solution, not just a focus group or a needs assessment, but they're also able to help design and think through that process to make sure everyone has the opportunity to recover out of this. And the last one is close to my heart and relevant to our conversation today is actually increase youth and adult partnerships by utilizing and uniting youth and families and community members together, utilizing the community school strategy to actually promote equity and collaboration and use and further their partnerships they have together. So there's some tremendous times that we went through, yes, but there are some great opportunities and great work happening. And I am so proud of all the community school coordinators and all the people who support them across the country.
Yeah. And I think some of the things you said really resonate, where it's, putting communities at the center of the design process, but also thinking about the opportunity to kind of leverage partnerships as far as thinking about the future of schools, and how do we think about, mitigating learning loss, learning acceleration, social emotional learning. What can we take from this current moment and think about how to, redesign, reimagine schools a little bit more with equity at the center, community schools really being set up to do that work. So I'm excited to see what happens with that. So I want to definitely kind of move us to a conversation around the future of community schools. How do we think about scale, sustainability, maybe some of this future work, as I mentioned too. I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask questions. Please put it in the Q&A function within our webinar here, and we will get to that right after this quick kind of portion talking about the kind of future of this work. So I kind of want to just move us on here to Jill and talk a little bit about how they were able to kind of scale and get this work prioritized. So, the current administration right now is talking about, funding increase for community schools at a national level. But Jill, you were able to kind of emphasize this work and do this without a federal grant. So I really want to know how Lehigh got this started. How were you able to leverage private funding, national service programs, scale, sustain the work? And then what advice would you give to others who are listening today and thinking about getting started?
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. So to say we started with no federal grant is totally true. We started this work 15 years ago with a $100,000 anonymous donation. And we weren't chasing the money. We were chasing a strategy that would allow us to do more than we were currently able to do in partnership with our public schools from a kind of family center social service perspective. And community schools gave us that strategy because it also cared about the academic component for kids and families. And so we started mobilizing. We researched the model. We contracted with the Children's Aid Society and brought them to the Lehigh Valley. We socialized the concept with lots of stakeholders, kids, families, schools, nonprofits, our corporate partners. And then we got this anonymous donation that we worked to secure. But so we began with 2 schools, and we started sharing every single story about all of the positive changes that were starting to happen in that school culture and in the lives and the mindsets of teachers, kids, and families. And so over time, we just started as a United Way, had the discretion to say, like, systems change work really matters to us. Programs and services are great, and we're going to continue to invest. But over time, just started shifting more money towards the systems change bucket. And we made it really beneficial to our corporate partners to be part of that work, right? And so it meant like lots of conversations to just keep educating our corporate partners and our donors about how complex it is to work within the realm of public education and what the needs of kids are coming in the door and how to leverage and harness those assets in a community, and that this strategy could really help us bring all of that together. So we also started connecting with our friends at the Coalition for Community Schools and other kind of national partners, and reading and socializing every piece of information that they were pushing out, right, to any stakeholder that would listen to us. So we secured our first corporate pledge to support a community school about a decade ago, and we've just been growing that out. I think it was a 2-year pledge, and we now have 7 or 8 corporate partners that have 3 to 4 year pledges of anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 a year. And we have a couple of individuals who are individual couple donors that are supporting an entire school site with an investment over a couple of years period. But we've also integrated faith-based partnerships that had some funding. They wanted to use the school space. We wanted some additional funding to be able to bring on, let's say, an activities coordinator or do some other work on infrastructure, and been able to leverage some of that. We've also leveraged our partnerships with our lead partners. So we have 5 lead partners right now: Communities in Schools of Eastern PA. We have 3 higher ed institutions: Northampton Community College, Moravian College, Lehigh University, and we have a health network, St. Luke's University Health Network. They're all in it for different reasons. and all of their reasons synergize with the vision of what we're aiming to do with community schools. And so I think, getting creative about who are the partners in your community that this model, this strategy really appeals to is really important. Our school districts have put more skin in the game, as well as they've been thinking through how to sustain some of the growth that they've seen in these partnerships. And then we have leveraged the heck out of our AmeriCorps Vista and our AmeriCorps program from one. I think we had one Vista when I started a dozen years ago, and we have a program that's over 30 now between our Vista and our AmeriCorps, scattered throughout that diagram that I shared at the beginning. And we've also then built some strategic partnerships, one with our local public television station. So to continue to magnify the outcomes that we're seeing, excuse me, in our work. And then we did finally land a full service community school grant in 2018. And so we have about just under $1 million a year invested into infrastructure of just coordinator positions. We have another 5 million or so annually invested into programs and services across our region that are part of that community school network. And then we have the full service grant on top of that, which is about 2.5 million over 5 years.
Quick question. Do you, if you have a district with multiple school sites, do you run this at the district level or do you run this at particular school site levels?
It's a great question. We started school by school, and really for it to gain the kind of traction that I think you need, you have to have this district leadership buy-in. So in some of our districts where we have that, it's really strong and we're leveraging more dollars than ever and more work with better outcomes. And in the districts where we're still trying to get to that top leader buy-in, you're working harder without needing to.
Thanks for that. So just want to move to Kata real quick. You all created a $20 million fund to support community schools in your state. Can you tell us about, how you made that happen, some of the partners involved in that, state level support, and what advice would you give to others who are thinking to build state level support for community schools as well?
Sure. Thanks, John. And I noticed that there were a couple of questions in the chat box about, if I don't work at a district or can make those decisions about state or federal funding, where do I start, right? So I think you've heard from all of us as panelists, you can definitely start small, and I'll start my answer there. If I were a teacher at a school that's currently not a community school, but I'm intrigued by this strategy, I would encourage you to work with fellow educators, administrators, parents from your school, or even if it's just yourself, you could map out the community in which your school resides, right? Like physically just do an inventory of, here's our school, what are the churches, the businesses, the nonprofits that surround the community in the school that could potentially be levered, right, as part of this work moving forward. So do you have a good sense of your community itself and the assets, the strengths that exist there? That's the first. The other is that you could take the 4 pillars of the community school strategy and look at that and kind of do a self analysis. So for example, how well does your school integrate student supports? Are there behavioral health supports, for example, available for students and families? If a student is hungry or a family is short on food, is there a mechanism at the school by which that need is identified and quickly responded to? Active family and community engagement. How well is that happening at your school site? How could that be strengthened? What are the enriched and expanded learning time opportunities available? Even in my position this year, I was a little bit shocked to learn that there were some elementary schools in our state that had no after-school programming whatsoever for any of their elementary school students. So they were planning to use the community school strategy as a way to do that for the very first time. That would be a good question. Do you have those after school and out of school time opportunities available for students and families? And then the 4th pillar, does your school utilize a collaborative leadership model? Are decisions that impact everyday business at your school being made with teachers, with family, and hopefully with students, at least their input? Or is it more of a top-down approach and there isn't much leeway for conversation or input? So that could be a starting point. And then it can gain traction, right? In terms of possible funding that schools could explore to pay their coordinator. You know, I don't know if I'd say it's one good or positive outcome of the pandemic. I don't know if there are any, but we know that there is going to be lots of federal funding available for public schools in FY22, next school year. So an example is Title I. I think we're all familiar with Title I. It's additional federal money that's used to support economically poor students. In addition, to give you a sense of how much more federal money is going to be made available through ESSER funds, CARES funds, you probably have heard it described that way, is 4 to 5 times more the amount than what a school or district would receive in Title I. So that's millions, billions of dollars for many of our states. And so districts, again, the good news is they're going to have lots of federal money available to respond to the pandemic. And we know that this, the community school strategy is an evidence-based intervention. So it is recognized by the USDE, the Department of Ed, as something that federal money can be spent on. So having a conversation with your principal or school leadership about, could you leverage some of those CARES federal funds to potentially pay a coordinator, right? Because they're going to have access to that money for at least the next couple of years. So I think there's some potential right now to really, use those federal funds in a very strategic way to consider the strategy of the community school model.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I mean, I think there is real opportunities with some of this federal money coming down. It's challenging that it's a lot of one-time money, one-year money, but I think, we can use it to kind of maybe, create a case and start putting some things in process and looking for longer-term sustainability in that as well. Another thing to think about too is, if districts or others want to do this work, are there technical assistance groups that can be helpful for them? And who might those groups be that they could, turn to look at, okay, I need to create a model that works for my particular context. I need some support to figure out how to bring together partnerships. How might folks go about doing that work? That's another question I think that I would throw out there. Maybe the panel, we can answer that a little bit later. It might look different in different places. In LA, we ran ours through the LA County Office of Education for some of ours with private philanthropic money, but also county money to scale that work eventually. But I also know too, there's lots of different ways this can be done on sustainability as well. So moving on to the federal question around this, Jose, I just want to bring you back in this conversation. As we mentioned, the Biden administration has signaled, wanting to support this at the federal level as well too. Can you tell us about the status of that, what that might look like, how any of that work can go to support the expansion of this work nationally?
Yeah, so I think Kata, because she mentioned some of the immediate funding streams that aren't long-term, you guys talked about, like the CARES Act and the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. And then next up right now, we know the American Rescue Plan that the Biden administration is trying to get passed. I think there's about $30 billion specifically for community schools in there. But the long game strategy. So last week, I want to thank, Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio and Kirsten Gillibrand from New York and Chris Von Hollen from Maryland. We thank their offices for working with us in a collaborative of folks from the coalition to put together the Full Service Community Schools Expansion Act. So that just dropped last week. So you're asking for $3.65 billion over the next 5 years. Now notice that right now there's 30 million. So about 54 communities have some full service community school funding. With this past Monday, or yesterday, actually they had more grantees had to submit. So they're estimating maybe about 80 different places that have some full service community schools funding. This Full Service Community School Expansion Act is a significant increase to $500 million as soon as it's adopted, but over the span of 5 years, $3.65 billion to expand, to actually support community schools serving low-income students, but also what's different in this act is to provide some collaborative leadership structures. We talked about, you said there's many different ways, we can do this. When I was in the local in Albuquerque too, it was through that joint power of agreement. I was employed by the county, but we worked very closely with the city, the school district, the United Way, the Hispano Chamber, Commerce, the University of New Mexico as well. So what's additional in this funding package, it actually helps promote and seed those type of collaborative leadership structures so we can actually sustain community schools. John, you talked about what can you do to advocate for it? Please call your members of Congress and ask them to support the Full Service Community School Expansion Act. Just tell them if you are a community school, if you're doing community school work, if you're doing family engagement work, if you believe in creating more youth agency, if you believe in creating greater partnerships, then go ahead and call them. School-based health centers, you name it, out of school time programs. Community schools really helps leverage all of our resources in all of these ways that we support children and their families. I saw earlier, and thank you for putting that, it was dropped, the return of investment of a community school coordinator. We were bragging about the coordinators a little bit earlier as well. So here in Albuquerque, we did a study on a coordinator. For every dollar we invested in them, salary and professional development, was a $7.11 return of collaborative resources back to the school. That school, and Kata, you can correct me if I'm wrong because you work in the Department of Education, is somewhat of an anomaly for sister schools across the state in regards to its data. Its impact having. That's Manzano Mesa Elementary School where we did that. Thanks for dropping that again. But that's the is that right? Yeah, okay. so I can't misquote that right there. You got the person looking at the data right on the call with me. But the future long-term vision is to have this Full Service Community School Expansion Act funding seed more community schools across the country. So please call your members of Congress.
All right. Thank you. So I want to thank you for that, Jose. I want to invite everybody kind of back on the panel so we can kind of go through some of these questions out there. I think all of you have kind of tried to chip in a little bit and answer them as you're answering your own questions on the fly. I love the ROI study. That's something we're trying to do here in the county too, is, not just kind of look at dollars, but also look at all the other kinds of like services. It's almost hard to quantify, right? Partnerships, for us,
just a couple of years.
It's like Medi-Cal sign up. It's as you mentioned, census. It's almost challenging to put into like an ROI calculation, right? So anyhow, I think that's really important work. I definitely want to kind of go through in the Q&A. Oh, one thing I did want to bring up again was the technical assistance stuff. And Jose, you might have a perspective on this from a national level. Who can help organizations if they want to get started, or districts or others who just need some support?
Our partners in one of the founding organizations of the Coalition for Community Schools is the National Center for Community Schools. They're housed with Children's Aid in New York. Historically, they have done a great job of preparing places to start a community school and design systems. The Netter Center for University Assisted community schools. They're a network of different universities that support community schools in some form or fashion, but they began in Philadelphia, but now support universities in developing community schools across the country. I mean, there's dozens of local and regional technical assistance centers, as Jill was mentioning. More and more local places are developing this arm of expertise of supporting community school development in their own areas as well. And us at the Institute for Educational Leadership, where the coalition is housed at, does some specific things in regards to principal leadership and collaborative and distributive leadership, and youth service provider mindsets to really help give them the knowledge, skills, and abilities to grow the youth agency part. So that's just a few to lift up, but there's many more out there.
Yeah. And it might just be kind of a local scan. Like if maybe United Way plays that role in your local kind of community. Maybe, you have a really strong county office of education,
Right.
board, county folks, so there might be, maybe you're closer to the state folks who can do this. So it might look a little bit different, I'm sure. So one other question, the big question that came up was multiple times is like, what are the big barriers to this? Why don't we see this everywhere? They should be everywhere. Tell us why we don't see more of this. What are the big, challenges you're running across?
Can I start, Jill, if everybody else add? I'll just say 3 words. Ready? Politics, personalities, and personal agendas. Mindsets. They could tell you more of the practical thing. I think it's a shift in mindsets.
Yeah, I agree. I think change is hard, right? And we have an education system that has been set up in the way that it operates for a really long time. And community schools at its core is challenging that operating system. It is saying, don't silo, right? Integrate with community, think differently about how you're doing things and resourcing. And that feels like real work. And it is, in addition to, just the role of supporting and educating kids. So I think it's everything that Jose said in those 3 words, and there's a lot to unpack there.
Anybody else want to, from their perspective, we mentioned before, like, I think Deb brought up, challenges around trust. I think this goes to your point, Jill, around like, it's new and folks are skeptical of new things that come in education. When I was a counselor in schools, we were like, hey, we'll ride this out. It's going to change. A new administrator comes in. Any of those challenges that others want to bring up, whether it's state level, local, others.
I just wanted to add that it is that at first, there are some folks who feel like our job at a school is to do reading and math, and that's it. Our job isn't to, support all the other needs that our families have. So there are some folks that have that particular mindset, but that's what's beautiful about the strategy is as they start to see, we all have these outcomes in mind, right? We want our students to thrive and be at grade level, but what are the barriers to get there? And through that process, if they're able to identify that and see, okay, what are the solutions and how do if we address those solutions, we're going to get those outcomes. And that's what all the evidence is showing in our state. And it takes time, right? It's to Deb's point, trust takes time, but once it's there, it's very effective.
Yeah, 2 other things I would add. There's a lot of need out there, and trying to figure out, how to get this as many places as possible with the limited resources we have can be challenging. Sometimes I feel like if you don't really understand community schools, like the model, and tailor it to what you need, it can seem like overwhelming. It's everything, right? It's partnerships as well, all these things, right? And so in our particular neck of the woods, we really have coordinated work with county agencies working deeply in school communities, because we can't, our coordinators can do a lot, but we have those county entities to help us do that work as well too. So some things I just wanted to mention there. Let's go to some other Q&A as well. I saw some things. We talked a little bit about the funding. Some folks asked about that. Another question, how can we mobilize youth and their families to advocate for these strategies, either locally at the state level or otherwise?
Deborah, you gonna take a stab at that? Jill, you had your mic off, go ahead.
Yeah, it's the double-edged sword, right? We want to be talking with people in community and we want them to be bubbling up the solutions. And so we don't want to necessarily lead with community schools as the solution to every problem. But I think if we're authentically engaging with community and we're asking kids and families the questions around, what do you want to see your school environment like? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the assets that you see? Being able to be ready with the understanding of what community schools is and presenting that so folks have language to put around their desires is part of the process of how you equip our kids and families with advocating for community schools, right? So they know what they want. They know what they want to see. It's kind of bridging the language. It's surfacing their desires, and then it's giving the language that allows them to advocate.
Yeah, if I could add on to that. We talk about relationships being the glue, right? you don't build relationships in a once a month gathering. You don't build relationships at just a once a quarter event. You build relationships with constant connection and communication. Name another public building. And John, like you, I started community schools. I was a county employee. When I entered in the community school space, I was actually working at the Juvenile Detention Center during that time. But name another public building that has the ability to communicate with the majority of households around it at least 40% of the year. If you did nothing else but just 180 days of school, at least 40% of the year. Name another public building, another place that has that much communication power. So one thing, communication. If you're communicating frequently with people, you create the venues for that to happen, and you just present and start learning what are some of the issues they want to change or the changes they want to make, then they start collaborating naturally. We do this in our relationships all the time. The one thing, so why don't we see change across the nation when we have every dollar, whether it be government, foundational, philanthropic, individual giving, going to the people who need it most, who we talk about a lot when we say community schools? Why don't we see change? Because it goes uncoordinated. We don't see communication. We don't see collaboration a lot. We see things placed there. It doesn't go coordinated. Community school strategies, you can look at all the reports, all the studies, that's why it's evidence-based now, is when it's coordinated, when all of that is coordinated, it produces results.
Thank you. Another question that was brought up, do you have any like city or local government-led examples of this anywhere? Another related question, somebody from Fresno brought up like the LA, which is more county-centric. And counties is maybe a natural partner for this because they just fund a lot of social services work and human health services work. So any kind of feedback around the kind of government, local government coordinated work here, examples?
Jill's one great example. I'll say Sun School System in Multnomah County, Oregon. That's like Portland area. They work with 6 school districts, and they coordinated one system where they go one RFP process, one reporting process, serving 91 community schools. That's been going on for, I think, at least over 2 decades, north of 2 decades. I'll always brag about Albuquerque because yes, right there, but I can probably give you 100 others in different structures. Jill, I'm going to add to that.
Yeah, Hartford comes to mind for me when I think about like local city government. The Hartford Community School initiative is a really strong one.
The collective impact models people speak about they were studying the community school system in Cincinnati. Yep. When they framed that was a foundation-based collaborative, community-wide collaborative. So you have many different types of examples. And John, just to go back what you said, it could look different. It's just how innovative. Who are the willing is where you start.
Yeah,
who are the willing?
I know Washington and Gates have been involved with a version of a collective impact running through school districts for many years as well too. So this is great. I mean, there's another question on here. I don't know how much we can really get into just how much it might impact things, but we have seen teachers unions really kind of tie themselves to community schools, I would say, just in some of the things they've been advocating for. There's a question in here a little bit about, are you finding, so they're putting community schools into their negotiations recently. I guess the question would probably be like, how are you finding this impacting the work?
That's a me question, huh? Because I see all that. Go ahead, Akata, you too.
Well, I was just going to say, in the case of New Mexico, when the Community Schools Act was passed by our state legislature in 2013, it provided for the creation of a fund that we've been able, like I said, before, to actually fund within the last 3 years with state monies. But it also calls for a statewide coalition, and it keeps us honest, right? So the coalition purposefully has membership that represents geographically all parts of the state, but we also have the presidents of our 2 teacher unions in the state as part of that, so that they can bring those issues to us, right? In terms of here's concerns they're hearing from their membership about working conditions, impact, and we can really discuss that in a safe place. They can be vulnerable, but they understanding that they can promote the strategy to their membership and respond to the concerns that they're hearing. So, for example, the perception that that some staff at a school may have that this is just additional work and how are we supposed to do it all, right? The teacher unions and in our experience have been very helpful in addressing that and having internal conversations with their membership about that.
Yeah, I'll just add. So yes, anytime somebody brings something to an authoritative figure, there's some angst about that. But what are we really asking for? We're asking to become more efficient, effective, and equitable with our resources. Are we asking for? We're really asking for kids and to have their needs met, but also increase their opportunities so they do well in life, create opportunities for them to actually do good in their community. That's what we're really that's what they're really asking for. If you just break down through all the noise of the politics of it, that's what they're really asking for. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. And before we close, I think at the heart, community schools are really just an equity strategy, like a really, really strong equity strategy, right? And so if you think about it through that lens, I mean, who in education or across sectors can't get on board with that? So that said, we are coming short on time. I want to give the panel any last thoughts, words, just briefly, before we close. Anything else that maybe we didn't mention, you just want to bring up really quickly before we start to close out here?
Yeah, I would just encourage folks, if you're listening on this call today and you're intrigued and maybe just starting to think about community schools, do it. Nobody's going to come to your door to give it to you, right? You have to do the homework, and the coalition and other national organizations have tons of material that you can just Google and kind of walk through, but inform and equip yourself. And then go mobilize your community. And it really does, like, everybody just needs to do their part. And we can get to all schools as community schools as more people learn about the strategy and put it into motion. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
I just wanted to add, thank you, Jill, for that. That yes, absolutely, John, as you said, it's an equity strategy. And one kind of mantra we have in our state is we're raising children first and test scores second, right? And so this is an equity strategy that attends to the whole child, and that we're raising our children with our families and our community, and that schools have a huge role in that. Everything from making sure they're well fed, that they're cared for, that their needs are met. And so this strategy helps us do that. Thank you.
All right. So I just want to say, you have lots of resources here in the chat. You can reach out to any of us or the campaign as well. If you need any support or thoughts or help or anything, feel free to reach out. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists, Jose, Jill, Deborah, Katharina. Thank you so much. This is great. I learned a ton. So hopefully you all have too, listening to us. And I'd love to turn it over to our campaign, Sarah and folks. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, John. Just an amazing conversation. I love how you walked us through it and loved what everyone had to share. Really so much expertise, insight, and the opportunities around this. There was one question that I think we missed, and we might have a moment to get to it because I really want to know the answer too, and I think that a lot of people are interested in knowing it to help make the case. Somebody asked a question about how you can capture and collect data that you can share with whether it's your local officials or state legislators like you did in New Mexico, Cata, to make the case for investments, whether it's local investments or state investments. Anybody have some insights to share on that before we transition to the closing?
I'd invite Jose and the other panelists to respond to that. I can respond now how the state's collecting the data, but again, it's kind of after lots of work to get to where we are as a state. So we use our current state reporting system that all schools and districts have to report everything from attendance, enrollment, all of that information. We actually included a community schools template. So for all of our community schools, they submit additional information in terms of referrals, the kinds of services that are being provided at that particular school site, And then of course, we already have their attendance data, suspension data as well, but we do collect that at the state level.
Thanks. And
Yeah.
I've taken note of your quote earlier, Katja. I just want to say that raising children first and test scores second. I think that really sums it up. Back to you, Jill.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're starting community schools, being really clear about what you're trying to accomplish should help you identify what is the data that you need to capture, right? And so some of it's hard data, some of it's not so hard data. And there's guidance out there, I think, from what our states collect, and local context is really important too. So we spent quite a while not having a clear goal about what we were trying to achieve with community schools, which meant we were tracking a million different indicators. And the beauty of kind of wrapping it all together with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, it has helped us streamline quite a bit. And beyond the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, we're still looking at some of those contextual indicators around, how many families are volunteering and part of a leadership decision-making team, et cetera.
Say if in regards to using data for advocacy, make it digestible for the elected official to say it. So pretty much, are the kids coming? Are they coming? Do my kids read and do math? And are they graduating? But make it, in other data that you use, make it digestible so they repeat it back.
Wise words. Very good point to make. So we're coming to the end of our 90 minutes together. I wanted to say thank you again, John. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Katarina, Jill, and Deb for joining us today and for sharing all of these insights. If you have not, those on the call today, please take a quick moment to fill out the survey that should have popped up on your screen a few minutes ago. Really does help us with our commitment to continuous improvement and making sure that these conversations are meeting your needs and informing your work. Up on the screen right now, you can see we've got several other great learning opportunities in the coming weeks in the 12:30 time slot Eastern time, as well as the 3 p.m. Eastern time slot. So I hope you'll find time to join in for more of those conversations. And until then, I hope everyone stays safe as well, and look forward to seeing you in future GLR Learning Tuesdays conversations. Thank you again to our panel. This has been great.